Thank you for joining us, everyone. Good afternoon. For those of you who don't know, my name is Nick Fotash. I am the founder of Rev Up Dental. We help clients, get more new patients, grow their practice, beat their competition. And we've got joining us tonight here Bill Henderson and Dr. Bernie Dolansky, who are going to share their insights and expertise and wisdom on the CDCP. When this program came out, we went around to all of our clients. We talked to hundreds of dentists, to get their opinions. Like, is this a good thing? Is this a bad thing? What are your thoughts on it? And the vast majority of people really weren't sure. They were kind of up in the air. And we found it almost impossible to get any dentist who would go on the record and share their opinion. And nobody really wanted to stick their neck out because they weren't really sure if this thing was going to be a success or a failure. So, but now it's been a couple months. CDCP is, it's out there. A lot of our clients are using it. So, I invited these two guests to kind of share their experience, talk about the CDCP. Has it been a success? Has it been a failure? How is it affecting practice valuations? Things of that nature. But before we start, let me do a quick introduction in case you don't know our guests. So we've got Bill Henderson, is recognized as one of Canada's leading experts in dental practice valuations and sales. After spending the first 25 years of his career in senior executive roles at Fortune 500 companies, including P&G and Invesco, Bill purchased Tier Three in 2008 with a group of partners following a disappointing...
Including Bernie!
Fantastic. Following a poor experience doing an appraisal for his spouse's dental practice. So over the subsequent years, he expanded the brokerage from a small Ontario-based operation into a national leader operating coast to coast. And in 2021, Bill sold the business to Henry Schein, but continues to serve as an advisor to management and select group of dental clients. We've also got Dr. Bernie Dolansky. So he's earned his DDS from the University of Montreal and a master's in endodontics from Northwestern University. He practiced endodontics in Ottawa for 37 years and held leadership roles as the president of the Ottawa Dental Society, Ontario Dental Association, and the Canadian Dental Association. A pioneer in dental economics, Dr. Dolansky was instrumental in the creation of CDA-NET, hopefully I'm saying that correctly, and has served as a consultant to major businesses. After co-founding a successful endodontic practice, he became the senior national partner at Tier Three brokerage, and he now advises dentists on practice transitions, valuations, and planning. So thank you so much for joining us and sharing your expertise tonight. So the CDCP, has it been a success? Is it a failure? What's the good, the bad, the ugly? What are your thoughts? What do you guys have you seen in the past couple months with this program?
Okay, let me lead off, and knowing my good friend Bill, he'll chime in. I have some background in managed care. If there are some older attendees on this webinar, you'll remember in the mid-'80s, there was a huge push by the insurance industry to introduce capitation managed care in dentistry in Canada. And I was very much a part of the opposition to that. We were very successful. And with the introduction of CDCP, 40 years later, we now have a program of managed care, but this time it's government. It's not the insurance industry, which is a huge difference. You can't push back. You have to accommodate. So, Nick, you asked, is it a success so far? The latest numbers are approximately 75% of licensed dentists in Canada are participating. So certainly from that point of view, I think the government sees it as a success, and many, many patients see it as a success. I am told that the feedback that the associations are getting is that the 25% not participating, a good part of those of that group are hardcore and very much opposed. So it'll be interesting to see if the numbers go up very significantly from 75%. Success has many parameters. The feedback is that the people who are participating, approximately 45 to 50%, think that it's working well. There's another cohort that are neutral, which means that they don't have any complaints, and a smaller group with complaints. So it does seem to be working well in that sense. The good, the bad, the ugly. The good is that at this point, if you wait for the frequencies of procedures, approximately 85% is being paid compared to the provincial fee guides. And of course, those vary across the country, which is good. But you didn't ask about the best. And the best is that we can balance bill. And that is something really extraordinary. And we will, I'm sure Bill and I will come back to it again and again. If you're participating, balance bill. This is about as good as this program is going to get. Over time, government programs tend to, shall I say, deteriorate with time. The program was formed in great haste. There's a great saying that says, act in haste and repent at leisure. Well, at leisure over the next few years, I don't think I'm sticking my head out very far by saying the percentage that's going to be paid compared to fee guides is going to go down. Hopefully, we will not lose the privilege, and just ask your medical confrères, the privilege of balance billing. So participating at this point in balance billing basically means you're going to keep patients, you're going to hopefully get more patients, and you will prosper. As far as the ugly goes, it is more onerous. Unfortunately, politicians have put out the word that we've given you, our voters, this wonderful program and have left a strong impression that it's free. And dental offices have to deal with that and explain it is far from free. As a matter of fact, if you balance bill for the group that are earning a family or household income between $80,000 and $90,000, they are paying almost 2/3 of the fee if you count the balance bill and the copay. So it is far from free, and that is a burden on offices. And I'm told that on November 1st, when predeterminations will become part of the program, they are not going to be as efficient as predeterminations for private insurance plans, which again will be an added burden on the front desk. Well, I'm sure you have comments.
But we could go on for hours and days, as you know. I'll jump a bit. What I would say is this: that we've modeled out the economic impact of this program on dental practices as people would expect. And the extremes here are massive in terms of potential outcomes. And none of us know where we're going to land. On one extreme, many of the people attending will know of RK House. Bernie and I were both part of a webinar he did, or attended a webinar he did recently. As an economist, he's modeled out very precisely a 14% increase in revenue associated with the program. We don't know. We know that up to 9 million Canadians will qualify. Bernie, you had referenced some of the stuff that's come out of the ODA survey of members, where they reported that there was a significantly lower level of oral health among CDCP participants. So you've got 9 million, up to 9 million Canadians, and that's about 22% of our population, who now can afford dental care and definitely need it. So I think we'll see somewhere between a 10 to 20% increase in the number of procedures done across the country. And if that was all balance billed, this is a huge win. The government's dumping annually $5 billion a year, and the industry doing $22 billion. Practice values to the point you ultimately want to get to, Nick, and earnings in the short term will all go up. At the other extreme, if this is the first step down the path of where our medical colleagues are at, and we end up in a world where government reimbursement is the only way to do dentistry on the majority of your patients, it will devastate the income and values of practices. And where we land between that is partially up to the politicians, but I would argue there's a lot that everyone on this call and all of your colleagues can do. Bernie, I think that the one thing I would say, the bad in terms of the published data so far, is it sounds like about 25% of dentists may not be balanced billing. That was in that ODA survey. Now, Ontario has embraced CDCP a bit more than other regions based upon the data, so that may or may not be overstating it. But let me say in no uncertain terms, and Bernie said it already, and you said we'll come back to it, we will multiple times. If you are accepting CDCP and not balanced billing, you are cutting your own throat in the long run. Some of you are doing it out of very good intentions, wanting to help out people who are on limited incomes, and I appreciate that. Some of you are doing it to try to attract more new patients. But there are two huge issues with that. Bernie already said that the probability of the CDCP reimbursement levels going up in line with your cost increases and fee guides is what percent, Bernie?
I like the saying slim and none.
Yeah. So think for a second, those of you who have made a choice to participate in not balanced bill, and contrast that to balanced billing. We're fortunate inflation's fallen dramatically over the last year. If fee guides go up 2 or 3% next year, and you're balanced billing, your patients will see a jump in a little small jump in what they got to pay next year for an appointment compared to this year, but it's not a huge jump. If you are not balanced billing, you just lost 2 to 3% of your revenue in real terms. Multiply that over the next 5 years, you've just dropped 10 to 15%. And the other thing you're doing is giving the politicians a perfect argument to eliminate the right that your associations and the national groups fought so hard for, the right to balance bill. If enough dentists aren't balanced billing, and I would say 25% is more than enough to persuade a politician, they'll simply make the case dentists can afford to live on the CDCP rates. So the most concerning thing I've seen is the fact that a number of dentists are not balanced billing, and that's going to, while in the short run, allow you to maybe attract some more patients. In the long term, it's going to be an unmitigated disaster.
Actually, I'm told by the CDA that 25% is pretty prevalent right across the country. It's not just Ontario.
Right.
There is a glimmer of good news in that 25%. The information that the CDA is getting is that a good part of that 25% are not balanced billing all the time. They're picking their patients.
Mm-hmm.
So it is not as bad as it looks, but really that number should be 0.
Yeah.
Yeah, while we're on that topic, because we're getting a lot of questions regarding that. So Robin Somerville asks, do you have any opinion on the legalities of balanced billing? Do you think this will be stopped, and when?
Yeah, I saw some of the questions. One of them referred to the fact that the RCDSO, the Ontario regulatory body, at one point was debating whether or not they should recommend to dentists that they not balance bill. I've spoken to people on the RCDSO Council, and I'm told that went nowhere and will go nowhere. So hopefully that part is true. As far as losing, and it is a privilege in Canada to balance bill. As far as losing it, we're getting into politics here, but I think if there is a change of government, it is less likely that a conservative government will do it, but it's politics. Who the hell knows? But it just reinforces what Bill and I are saying. Take advantage of what we have now. If things change, it is not a single payer system yet. It's highly unlikely it ever will be. So you can always opt out. You can choose not to treat patients if the fees will not support what you should be getting. So take advantage of what you can do now, which is 100% of your fee guide.
And let me throw the caveat out here, Bernie. We've been doing this so often now that we've forgotten our caveat. Don't anyone out there think we're advocating for the CDCP. A very wise dentist told me back in May, just as the program was launching, Bill, I think all my fear, it's like we're all ship captains captaining a ship. And we're in the middle of the worst storm we've ever been in. Bernie, you probably remember who told us this.
Yeah.
Actually, I told him I'd give him credit. So it was Dr. Zayshan Ali gave me this analogy. And he said, all of my peers are standing on the bridge of the ship, raging against the storm. I'm just trying to find a safe way through the storm to a safe harbor. So we're not here to advocate or support the program. Each of you will make your own decisions. We are here really to help explain the economic consequences and what we're seeing. So I think that's an important thing for us to say. Don't because I know some of the folks, the comments are taking us to task. If it's okay with you, Nick, I just wanted to talk just a little bit about the economics I was citing. Is that okay?
Absolutely.
Yeah, so there were some comments coming through that the CDCP drives up costs, so increases in revenue don't yield increases in costs, and that's a very astute comment from Tina. And the modeling we've done factors that in. The key thing to remember for all of you is you've got a set of costs that are fixed, and you've got a set of costs that are variable. The variable costs, things like supply, in the long run, staffing tends to be variable. Those costs are going to go up as procedure counts go up. So they'll go up if you're doing 15% more dentistry at CDCP rates, 20% below what you're billing today. Your staff costs are going up significantly. They're also going up if you're doing 15% balance billing. But you have a lot of costs that are fixed. The most obvious one is occupancy costs, whether you own your building or are leasing it. Generally, repair and maintenance are fairly fixed. So as you add revenue, those don't go up. So our modeling took all of that into effect. And the one other thing I'd say about the modeling we did is we're modeling in significant wage increases going forward. Because what we know, and I'm sure everyone out there on this watching us, most of you are already experiencing challenges with either attracting staff to your office or the wage demands they have. And one of the absolutely clear impacts of the CDCP, there will be an increase in demand for dental procedures, plain and simple. That requires more hygienists and more chairside assistants. And with a fixed supply in the short run and increased demand, wages are going up. That's going to exacerbate what is already a real problem in the industry. So when I was throwing numbers around, just so everyone knows, I was using an assumed 20% increase in wages on just a 15% increase in revenue. But that is one of the many things we're dealing with here.
Yeah, the staff challenge issue is definitely a big problem. There's a lot of clients that would love to be open more, take on more business, but they're basically bottlenecked by that. So when you add this, huge influx of new people coming in through this program, And I think, like you mentioned before, generally they have like worse oral health, higher demands, right? So they're tougher patients to deal with. I think that definitely adds, a lot of pressure to the team. It's a tough situation. So let's talk about, in the short term, we discussed like some of these challenges. Like, what do we think is going to happen in the long term in terms of, practice values, the economics of running a dental practice? What do you guys foresee in the next, couple of years?
It comes back to balance billing again. If you're balance billing and covering your costs or most of the increase in costs that Bill is talking about, your practice values are going to stay roughly the same. If you're not balance billing using today's number of, let's say, taking a 15% haircut on your revenue and most of your costs stay the same, a few of your variable costs, none of your variable costs will change. Our modeling shows a 45 to 50% drop in your practice value. It's that drastic. I'll repeat that. If you are not balance billing and accepting 85% roughly of your usual fees, and it was your entire practice, 100% CDCP, our modeling shows a 45 to 50% drop in value.
Wow.
And
Yes.
if we take that
wow is the right answer, Nick.
If we take that one step further, because you were using 85% fee level on 100% of the business, right, Bernie?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
If the CDCP fees do not keep up with inflation, and that fell to 75%, our modeling would suggest practices that on average dentists working in a practice, so who want to practice, say a single dentist operating a solo practice, they're going to have a 45% cut to the money they make, and their practice will be worthless. Because essentially you make as much money as an associate at that point as you do owning a practice. So why would you take on the hassle?
Yeah, don't forget that your practice value depends not on your top line, not on your revenue. It depends on your bottom line after paying everybody, including yourself. So what Bill essentially just outlined is you are wiping out that bottom line. And that's what your practice value is predicated on.
Right, not the revenue, but the profit.
Right.
Yeah. And I'm going to circle back because there's one virtual certainty, which is if people do not balance bill, that becomes an increased risk, both within their practice and within the industry. If 100% of people balance bill, and the associations fight very effectively. Remember, the government came into this, and Bernie and I know some people who were involved in some of the early consultations here. The initial plan here was not to allow balance billing. Mm-hmm. The initial plan was far more something like many of the provincial programs in Ontario, Healthy Smiles, ODSP, where balance billing is forbidden. That was the initial intention, and your associations did fabulous jobs managing that. But it's a right that can be lost. So, you need to continue to support them in their efforts because that will determine where we end up. There's no doubt about it.
Now, just because we have a few attendees here that are not actually Canadian dentists, since our audience is all across North America. So just for those in the US, maybe you guys can cover, there's a couple questions that came in that would be interesting to discuss. So are fees for balance billing disclosed before the patients get into the office? And are there basic services that, have to be covered without balance billing?
The answer to the second question is no. There are no basic services that you can't balance bill for. And just to show you the range of fees, we're talking about basic service. Scaling fees are covered at about a 96% level. Pro fees, polishing, which is considered cosmetic by the government, are covered at about a 9% level. So there is a great range, but the answer is no, there's nothing that you can't balance bill for. And the first part of the question was what, Nick?
Do you have to disclose the fees to the patient before they come into the office, the fact that there's going to be balanced billing?
If you're wise, yes. Essentially, the clients that Bill and I are working with, our advice to them is that send out information or have easily available information on your website at your front desk as to what your policy is. As I said, for our American friends, there are 3 stages, if you wish. Those who have a household income under $60,000, there is no copay. They get the full 85%. The dentist will get the full average 85% fee. Those whose household incomes are between 70 and 80%, 60% will be reimbursed to the dentist, and the dentist is supposed to balance bill for the other 40%, which brings them up to the 85%. And then that's the copay, and then they can balance bill for the other 15%. It's up to the dentist how they inform the dentist, the patient, etc. But obviously, if you want to keep your hassles to a minimum,
absolutely,
be upfront and explain, look, this is going to cost you $100. I see from your card that you're in that middle group, that $70,000, $80,000 income group. I am going to get 60% paid by the government, and there's $15 that you're going to have to pay. And
that's the challenge when the perception is that we're all getting free dentistry, right? And you have to have this conversation with them and practice it. And it's definitely something that you want to train your staff on, and it'll become easier. Because if they feel like it blindsides them, then you can have a very awkward conversation at the end there.
Yeah. Bill has a client who was extremely proactive before it even started. Mm-hmm. He went through his patient list, found everybody who was of a certain age and was likely to be covered, and sent them letters explaining exactly how it was going to work. That to me is brilliant.
Yeah, I think that's the key point. For those of you who are going to choose to accept CDCP in your practices, which we know is 75%, and that 75% was up, that number is from September 19th, Bernie. The August 5th number, so about 5 weeks earlier, was 70. So we do know it's still ticking up. The 2 things to remember, first of all. One is the number of people who have received their card is very different than the number of people who've had an appointment at this point. It's only about 30%. Now, many will have appointments scheduled with you in the future.
Actually, Bill, I was told by the CDA 22% at this point have been treated.
Actually, but the numbers that came out last week showed the September 19th numbers were 30. The CDA that stuff came out last Thursday. But whether it's 22 or 30, the point is still the same, which is roughly only 40% of the Canadian population qualifies today. I mean, the eligible population, those under 18 and those 65 plus disabled adults. So the number of people beginning in January who will qualify will go from 40% of the households making less than 90,000 to 100%. And if you map that out, the number of people you have seen in your practices, those of you who are accepting CDCP, is just 1/8 of where it's going to end up, most likely. And therefore, if those people are sitting back saying, I'm not going to accept it, I'm not losing that many patients, you've got to factor in the fact that 60% of the people who will qualify in January don't today. But back to your point, Bernie, I think, and Nick, your firm's excellent at this. This is all about controlling the narrative. The clients I'm working with who are controlling the narrative because they've chosen to accept CDCP, they're focusing on the savings they're going to help their patients achieve.
Exactly.
Rather than the money they're going to have to pay. And Bernie's comment, I know a number of dentists now who have initially reached out proactively to their patients over 65 and under 18. Now they're doing it to their patients, usually in office, between 18 and 65, basically saying, we don't know if you're going to qualify or not because we don't know your income and that's not our business. But we know you're not insured, so you may. The appointment you had today cost you $250. It was a hygiene appointment. And because hygiene reimbursement levels are a bit higher, they're saying, in January, if you qualify for the program, this appointment would have only cost you whatever the range is based upon their payout. And he was doing it particularly with patients who were getting the 100% reimbursement level and said, your appointment might only cost you $25. And so that crown you've wanted but couldn't afford, in the new year, we'll be able to deliver both the hygiene appointment and the crown for just a little bit more than you paid today. So I think those of you who have chosen to accept the plan,
you need to change your communication strategy.
And make sure your staff are focused on savings, which doesn't mean you're not going to get people pissed off. It's not free. We all know that. But being proactive rather than reactive is the key. Because you talk about we want to help you save, you're now all of a sudden telling them there's still going to be some cost.
How you present it is going to make a huge difference. So, we monitor, I think 50, 60,000 new patient calls a month for, hundreds of offices across US and Canada. You'll see such a big difference with two exact scenarios where one practice, based on how they explain it to the patient's happy and excited and, they're excited to come in, and another one, that is poor, the program is poorly communicated to them. They just have a lot of questions. They seem really frustrated. Someone made a comment here at how Justin Trudeau on Colbert Report said, it's going to be free dental care, right? So you have to battle with that. But spending some time working with your staff, training them on how to have these conversations is so important, because how you present something could determine whether that patient gets excited about coming in, and you find more opportunities to do dentistry. Like I said, there's that crown you wanted, now it's going to be more affordable, versus if you're just if you're not communicating it well, you're going to have a lot of people that are frustrated and causes more administration issues, obviously lowers your productivity, your profit. Excellent point. I think how you present it matters a lot.
Yeah, and the Provincial and Canadian Dental Association have both this fall initiated online campaigns to try and inform patients that, in spite of what the politicians say, it's not free.
Absolutely.
Nick, I'd like to circle back to you. Asked about the impact on practice values. Couple of points I'd like to make there. One, so far, no impact for the most part. It has not even been as big a concern or question from buyers as I thought we might be facing. But there is one question every buyer's asking me, which is, are they balance billing? Are they accepting CDCP? And if so, are they balance billing? And whether or not you're accepting CDCP, Bernie's experience may be a bit different, isn't significantly impacting purchaser interest today. I have had purchasers, because I've got a client right now who's not accepting it, say, if they're not accepting the CDCP, I'm not sure I can trust your patient counts. And we're working to address that concern. The concern being they might be losing patients. But so far, without exception amongst the buyers I'm dealing with practices we've got for sale, and this is mostly what I'm hearing from our colleagues, accepting CDCP isn't hurting perceived value, and so long as you're balance billing. But if our answer to a buyer is No, they're accepting CDCP and not balanced billing. I think that'll devastate the level of interest in the practice for all the reasons we've talked about. So short-term CDCP is neutral to probably a bit positive with most buyers who see it as a revenue and earnings opportunity. Long-term, it's all going to boil down to earnings, as Bernie said. If earnings stay the same, values stay the same. If they go up, and then values will go up. But if they drop, and because of that fixed component I talked about earlier, small changes in revenue get amplified significantly into much bigger gains or losses in earnings, and therefore much bigger amplified increases or decreases in practice value.
Because, again, just a brief reminder of how practices are valued. It is earnings, it is your bottom line, but a multiple is applied to that. And generally speaking, that's going to be 5 to 7 times, depending where in Canada and the particulars of the practice, etc. There are outliers, but let's say if we use the number 6, for every dollar that you drop on your bottom line, you're losing $6. Or let's say $10,000 that you drop by not accepting or not balanced billing, you've just lost, on average, $60,000 in value. So there's a huge multiplier. And just to make it even more multiplied, in Canada, we have something called the capital gains exemption. So the first 1.25 million that you get for your practice is tax exempt. So you can keep all those dollars that you either gained or lost. So these are important financial decisions. It seems like no big deal. It's only 15%, et cetera. But the multipliers are powerful.
Now, is this program something that really benefits practices that are already kind of playing the volume game? Some practices, dentists want to run a more boutique office. They offer exceptional dentistry. They might charge a bit more, but, they want to, offer a higher level of service. Does this program impact, like if you have on one end, you have your boutique practice, somebody who, wants to do the best dentistry possible, isn't just going to cut a lot of corners. And on the opposite end, you've got a practice that's dealing with just get everybody in, do some quick work. Is this program going to affect them both the same or differently?
Interesting question.
Should they consider a different strategy? Like, is this really going to force everyone to play more of become a McDonald's of dentistry, or you're going to, what are your thoughts about, what's the ideal strategy moving forward?
Well, when we did our modeling, we sort of did it on a decision grid. And your decisions are very different if you have a full schedule. If you have a full schedule, then if you choose to take the program, it's going to affect just those patients. If you have holes in your schedule, you're in a very different situation and you can benefit from it much more.
Right.
But again, it all comes down to that average 15%. If you have holes in your schedule and you fill them at 85% of your usual revenue, yes, you're going to take a hit both in revenue, in earnings, and in value. If you fill them and you get 100% of your fee, your practice value just went up a great deal. So I think that's the differentiator, Nick. It's not so much the boutique practice. I'll quote you what one of my clients said to me. They have a very full schedule. And I said, are you going to take CDCP? And they said, no. I said, well, aren't you afraid of losing patients? Said, those are all the patients I want to lose, Bernie.
And that was going to be my comment, Bernie, that Nick, if somebody's operating I think you called it a boutique or higher end practice, the probability they've got a lot of patients that might leave if they don't accept CDCP is very low to begin with.
Right.
And, they, as Bernie just said, they may not be as happy with those patients as others. And if they've got a full chair, to his point, they'd rather be working on the patients who will pay for a very high level of care. So I think if you're operating a high-end practice with very few people who will qualify for this program, then yeah, I wouldn't accept it for the sake of 1 or 2 or 3% of the patients. And
Absolutely.
Sadly, there are people who are consciously choosing to not balance bill and are using this to drive new patient flow on a much higher level of procedures at a lower margin. So I think we will see some bifurcation, but hopefully the people who aren't balance billing realize that, yeah, this will work for a year or two, and then it's just going to be a long, slow decline into a very unprofitable practice. I wanted to come back to address one comment because that Tina was challenging my comments that buyers aren't all that interested, or sorry, should be very concerned. And Tina commented that any financial advisor can see that this does not bode well for practice values. And I guess what I'd say is that all depends on how it plays out. But to the extent that the market has voted so far, we all know that there's one very large publicly traded dental organization in Canada. And since May, the stock value of that company's gone up 20%. And I'm talking about Dental Corp, obviously. And so that it's very clear that at least in the world of multi-billion-dollar investments, there's some belief this could add meaningfully to the value of practices. So I'm not sure that and certainly the financial advisors I know advising dentists, and we know a whole lot of them, don't we, Bernie? They're not telling people to avoid this. I was just looking at that chart. That's how I came up with my 20% since May.
Yeah.
I think people are absolutely waiting to see. I would say one other thing, though. Certainly nobody's advising dentists not to buy a practice that I've heard of. None of the mainline financial advisors. This is a statement we could have made at any point in the last, Bernie, your career is longer than mine, but over the last decades, there's zero doubt that the importance of business management, cost control, and focusing on the business side of your practice is going to be more important in the future than it has been in the past. Dentistry's gotten harder over the last 10 years than it was, and even more so over the last 20 years. And the CDCP has the potential to make it a lot harder still, especially depending upon how things play out, because you'll be dealing potentially with, on a portion of your business, lower margin or lower revenue and lower margin business. So, you mentioned that I got into this business because I'm married to a dentist. When Maureen graduated, dentistry was a healthcare profession. You could go anywhere, you could put an ad in the yellow pages to date Maureen and I, and you could fill a practice. And if you deliver great quality healthcare, you were fine. Over the last 40 years, to age Maureen a bit and me, we've seen that shift from a healthcare profession to a healthcare business.
Right.
And those of you who are worried about potential outcomes here, back to Zajan Ali's comment about, hey, you've been dealt a hand of cards, and you need to figure out how to play it. Being more focused on your business, looking at areas to improve your earnings, will help insulate you against whatever downward pressure there is. Bernie, I'm sure you'd chime in on that in some way, shape, or form.
Yeah, absolutely. The business of dentistry has become much more difficult, and the practice of dentistry has also become much more difficult. The rules, if you want to call them, the regulations, the sterilization, everything is more complex, more complicated, takes more time, takes more effort. CDCP is just one more chip on that pile. And it's going to become more important to do some of the things that Nick does for his clients. I can say, and I'm sure, Bill, you concur, when we do our valuations at Tier 3, we do a lot more metrics than most of our competitors. That's not bragging. That's a fact.
No, absolutely. Yeah.
And
I can vouch for that.
yeah, and many of the metrics that we do include practice management metrics. For instance, comparing how many appointments are 2 units of scaling to 3, and empty chair time, et cetera, And I can tell you that 95% of the practices that I see, and I think last year, I personally, with my partner Neil, did over 50 valuations that I examined in detail. They all had great room for improvement. They all had efficiencies that could be implemented, and to make up for all the things I've talked about, on both the business side and the practice side. And people who are listening to this, there's help out there. There are people like Nick. There are other consultants. There's software that can help you. And those are the things you're going to have to do going forward to maintain both your income and the value of your practice.
Yeah, there's a lot of holes in the bucket for a lot of practices. I mean, most of the time, 9 out of 10 dentists will come to us thinking, the way they're going to grow their business is by, getting a new website, doing marketing, getting more patients. And oftentimes, the way we can, help double their patient flow is just fixing internal issues. A lot of these little bottlenecks that, Tina made a comment that, everyone's already running a tight ship. I beg to differ. We analyze hundreds of dental offices, and I can tell you most people, there's so many blind spots where they're losing patient, they're losing value. People aren't getting rebooked. There's cancellations coming in. Nobody's even asking them, if someone calls to cancel saying, my son is sick, he got sent home from daycare. I can't come in on Wednesday. A lot of dentists are shocked when we show them that, 8 out of 10 times your staff just says, okay, no problem. Call us when you want to come back. Bye. Right. So it's really important to track your costs, your financials. One thing that we, rarely see dentists track is, what is the value of a patient for you? How much money will they spend? How often will they come back? How much can you afford to spend to get them? A lot of these financial metrics, when you're looking at, the value of a patient, the, rebooking rate on cancellations, most of the time when I ask these questions to dentists, they just stare at me like deer in headlights. They've never tracked any of these things, right? So that's why I always recommend it to a lot of our clients, get a practice valuation done. You're going to, even if you're not looking to sell, you're going to understand where all your, all the holes in the bucket are. Because when you compare it to other practices and you see hey, this area is doing really well, but your attrition rate's actually really high. Let's dig into that a little bit. It gives you, kind of like a roadmap for how you can improve things. And I think a lot of dentists, you'll see this, especially when you're looking at the US. I mean, an average x-ray here, Bertie, how much does somebody pay for a full set of x-rays?
You're asking the endodontist to stop practicing. I can look it up for you, Nick. But
whatever the number is, you're going to find that in the States is a third of that, right? And they still manage to run when you see what insurance or PPOs will reimburse for a cleaning for X-rays. Generally compared U.S. dentists compared to Canadian ones, they run a lot more efficient. They're forced to, right? So I think CDCP is going to introduce a lot more pressure to really look at all the little metrics and try to find those little optimizations everywhere.
Yeah, you make an excellent point, Nick. I mean, one of the great tragedies of dental education, and it's not just true in this country, it's true everywhere, is to succeed as a dentist, you need to have the clinical skills, no doubt about it, and it's a healthcare profession. That's got to be trained. But there's no training on the business side. And if anything, Bernie may or may not agree with me, but I would say the ability to be a great dentist more often than not is inversely correlated to the ability to be a great dental or business person. And there are, as you said, there are people out there who can help. Getting an appraisal at least lets you know where you're starting from, where your risks are, where your opportunities are. And your comparison to the U.S. is something that I'd just like to comment on, because it's easy to sort of descend into the, oh, woe is me. And we all do that from time to time. We've got the benefit of operating brokerages or being part of a network of brokerages in the US, in the UK. We've got an operation in Spain. We had close ties to one in Australia. One thing that I'm not sure all Canadian dentists realize is how good we've had it here. You were referencing it. You see it every day. We see it when we're comparing results versus primarily US and UK. And the pressures, if the right to balance bill is not maintained. If the right to balance bill is maintained, then the CDCP, I will continue to say, is a win. But if the right to balance bill is not maintained, we're merely moving to the price levels that most U.S. dentists operate at today. We're merely moving into a world that's closer to the UK. And I can tell everyone on the call, because much is made of the NHS in the UK. Practices who are entirely dependent upon the NHS in the UK still have value, and they still have reasonable value. Nothing like Canadian practices, but they still have reasonable value. Dentists still make an acceptable living, not as good as they do here. But it's because of what you just said, Nick. They've all had to get a lot more focused on the business side.
Yeah, someone brought a point about staffing costs. So from what I can see, and I'll have to double check that, because it's actually an interesting point, but it does look like staff costs are actually higher in the US overall. Right, because there was a point made that, well, the US pays a lot less for staff, but I don't think that's the case.
And don't ever lose sight that Canadian dentistry is somewhat unique in that we actually set our own fees.
Yes.
Very, very different from the US, very different from the NIH, etc. Our associations, which represent the dentists, set the fees, and 99% of the dentists charge those fees. And when I talk to US dentists, which I do quite often, they actually don't believe me. They say that cannot be true. They actually think I'm putting them on. And it's very unique. And it makes a huge difference in our revenues, our earnings, and our practices.
Yeah, we know definitively that the average practice and our database is a bit skewed, isn't it, Bernie? We're dealing with people with active practice generally closer to the end of their career than their beginning. But people with active practice is closer to the end of their career than their beginning. If you pay the dentist as if they were an associate in their own practice and strip away everything all the personal expenses, their Canadian profit margins run in the 20 to 25% range. In the US, they're around 12 to 18 on average. So they're dramatically more profitable. Much of what's coming is pushing to maintain that. There's been some back and forth on staff and wages. And that's one thing I want to come back to because, like it or not, the ship has sailed in terms of whether the majority of Canadian dentists are going to accept this plan or not. And those who are accepting it, certainly, with very few exceptions, aren't going to reverse course because their patients are expecting it. But that doesn't mean, so the battle to stop the CDCP is, from my point of view, over. We lost. I was never a fan of it. Bernie was never a fan of it. Very few people in our industry were fans of it. But we lost that battle, and we should all accept that. But the war's not over. There are 5 critical areas going forward that I would urge everyone to shift your energy and your enthusiasm from fighting the battle we've lost to winning the battles to come. And, that boils down to maintaining the right to balance bill. It is doing everything possible to ensure our CDCP reimbursement levels track upwards with inflation. It absolutely means finding ways of increasing the supply of hygienists and chairside assistants through training, through immigration. Without that, staff costs are all driven by supply and demand, and that's critical. It's equally important, and Bernie, you've got a lovely example that the associations and the industry continue to work on some of the really silly aspects of how various procedures are handled, and making sure that the inevitable problems with the predetermination process are sorted out. I just urge everybody, that's where we need to put our efforts, because that's what will determine the future. Bernie, I think you should talk about the example you've got of how some of these things are just don't make any sense.
Yeah, there's a lot of silliness in it. Let's take a step back. Why did this happen? It happened quite simply because a political party made a deal with another political party to stay in power. That's why it happened. As one of the bureaucrats involved in putting this plan together said to me, Bernie, normally a plan like this would take 3 to 5 years to plan and implement. We had to do it in under a year because our political masters forced us to do it in under a year. So we took an off-the-shelf plan, the NIHB, which was designed mostly for Indigenous patients, had many anomalies in it, but it only covered a very small segment of the total population. And suddenly it became the plan for potentially 9 million patients. And that's the history. As Bill said, that's done. And it's not going back. So what do? You make a decision about what's best for you. Bill wants me to give you some of the examples I cited to him. Why is a endo fee higher for an oral surgeon than a GP or an endodontist? Makes no sense. There's a rule that if you do an endo, you can't restore it with a crown until you show that in a year, I think it's a year or a year and a half, that the area has healed. Oh, I did endodontist for 37 years. If you don't restore that damn tooth, it's never healing. Stupid rules. And I can tell you that our associations are working on trying to correct some of that stuff. But at the same time, keep the eye on the ball. The two most important things are maintain balanced billing and try to keep the fees at least close to what we charge all our other patients. That's the ball. And that's where the eye has to be.
Fantastic. So we're almost at an hour. We've got a lot of comments in here. It's going to take some time to sort through them all.
Do you have any sort of questions? I mean, everyone's entitled to their own point of view, and we've all been tracking the chat. And
I think the analogy you gave with the ship, raging against the storm is definitely
that's people are entitled to their own points of view, and but I think the real thing is, do people have questions that two people who know a lot about practice economics and practice valuation can help with, that aren't debating whether this program should be here or not because it's here, but really help guide you through?
So, yeah, we did have one question for Bernie. So, earlier you had mentioned that, if you're cutting $10,000, you're really taking $60,000 off of your, practice value. So the question was, when you indicate 5 to 7x multiple, what is that on? Cash flow, excluding associate comp, or just textbook EBITDA?
No, it's textbook EBITDA minus the cost of paying the dentist. So as a general rule, it varies a bit in circumstances. We will take 40% of the dental production as a cost for paying the dentist. If an investor buys the practice, they're going to be paying an associate approximately 40%. If it's an individual buying the practice, they probably are coming from an associateship where they were paid 40%. It's the general benchmark across the country. So it's your textbook EBITDA less 40% of the dentistry. That's where Bill got his 20 to 30% of revenue is what we generally see for most practices after you've done that exercise. Does that answer the question?
So we'll see if it responds back. I did want to make a point about, the quality of patients you can attract is going to have a huge impact as well, right? If you're playing the volume game, we deal with a lot of dentists who want to get patients very quickly, and I think CDCP is a way to do that. Before it was just discounts, flyers, promotions, all kinds of stuff. But we work with plenty of practices that, like you said, they already have a schedule filled with what I would deem like higher quality patients. They're not dependent on insurance, and I think that if you focus on helping your practice stand out, building a strong reputation, you can still drive you can still fill your schedule with high quality patients that have nothing to do with CDCP. So just a point here, but we did have a question for Bill. Should I, as a practice owner, accept CDCP or not, given the intent to sell the practice in 10 to 12 years? If the answer is it depends, that's okay. We can have a call offline.
I'd invite anybody to give Bernie or I a call offline. And sadly, I think the answer is it depends. But let me give everyone, because it's a great question, 10 to 12 years from now, will your decision to accept CDCP or not impact what your practice sells for? All of that is against the context of what we've talked about in terms of what may or may not happen in the industry. But I think I'd use as my leaping off point in answering it, Nick, what you just said. I think it begins with your fundamental business strategy. If your business strategy is, and this makes sense given your location and given you and your capabilities and your ability to invest. If your strategy is to appeal to high-end non-insurance dependent patients, then you'll build a more profitable practice, whether or not CDCP is around. But I think the vast majority of dentists are in situations where they're dealing with middle-income Canadians and lower-income Canadians. That makes up the majority of the Canadian population. And what I would say is this: so long as if you don't accept CDCP today, you're going to lose patients. Now, whether that'll be 1% of your patient base or a much larger number, that depends on how many meet the income criteria. And if you don't accept CDCP, you're going to have a harder time building a sort of average, middle-of-the-road family practice. So I believe that given the hand you've been dealt, for most people in most circumstances, there's little choice but to accept, because otherwise you'll lose patients, and it'll be harder to attract some new patients. Take me, for instance. My daughters live separately from us, and Maureen and I sure as hell don't qualify for CDCP, but I want my dentist to accept it for my kids' sake. So I think that if you balance bill, and that's what it all comes back to, you're going to build a practice faster than if you don't. And not as fast as the people who risk destroying the industry by not balance billing. So I think that in the long run, unless you're targeting a high-end clientele, you don't have much choice. And if the sky falls and we lose the right to balance bill, et cetera, you're going to be impacted the way others will. But Bernie, what would you say? I mean, it's a...
Well, actually, I'm in a real life situation. In 25 minutes from now, I am scheduled to do an online meeting with a client who is ready to sell their practice. I've done the valuation, so I know the practice. And when they called and said they're ready to list, this person also said that he was not accepting CDCP because he was afraid that it would make his practice less valuable. And I will be meeting with him now in 24 minutes and explaining to him exactly what we've been talking about today. That if he has patients who are asking for CDCP and is in danger of losing those patients and is willing to balance bill and should balance bill, the opposite is true.
Yeah.
Now, do you have any numbers on Bill, I think you'd mentioned before, average attrition rate for practice, historically has been maybe 5 to 8%. Is that true?
Higher than that, actually. COVID cranked it up, and that may be temporary as people move out of seeing the dentist in downtown centers to where they live. But traditionally, pre-COVID, it was running around 8% in an average practice. And since then, our numbers are still tracking in the 10 to 11% range.
And for the practices that don't accept CDCP, what are we estimating? How high could attrition get?
It depends on how many patients they've got that qualify for CDCP. I'm dealing with one client who says, Bill, I've had 5 patients ask about it. And then, other practices have had a reasonable number. So I think the reality is, hey, some people will continue to pay you full freight because they love you so much as a dentist. But there are a couple of things that generally guide the behavior of the vast majority of people. And saving money is one of those things. So, if somebody had, and we don't know, I mean, high loyalty to your dentist and 10% of your patient base qualifies, and you're currently running 10% attrition, wouldn't surprise me if it went to 15% because half of those folks will go for a much lower cost. But we don't know yet.
Yeah.
We will see higher attrition, though, for sure.
Yeah. Essentially, it's an individual decision at the end of the day. And you know your patients and your patient list best. Just look at it. How many patients, let's say you have 1,500 patients. It won't take a lot of time for you to review your patient list and figure out, let's say 10% are going to qualify for CDCP. Are you willing to risk losing that 10%? Where, is 1,350 patients going to be enough for you? And what will it do to your practice value? At the end of the day, it's each dentist who should take the time to make the decision as to how it will work for them. And it's not difficult to figure out. It really isn't. I've just given you a very brief outline on how you can do it. If you want to do a full valuation, we can figure it out in great detail. But you don't need to pay for a valuation to figure it out. And again, 75% of dentists have made that decision that they think it's going to work for them. It's early, very early days. Probably in about 6 to 9 months from now, if it's still at 75 or higher, we'll know it's working for most dentists.
Now, we had one question on from Robin Somerville, and I actually this question did catch my eye earlier. I unfortunately forgot to ask it. So, is Henry Schein, or supply companies in general, fear that they're going to be losing a lot on equipment sales over the next 5 years?
I've talked about that. Bernie and I aren't on that side of the business, but we do talk to the people on that side of the business. I'll answer it in 1 second. I was just going to say, Cyril made a comment as we were going through that amplifies what Bernie said. Your decision needs to be based on your practice. He's had 150 patients ask about the program and only 5 leave. And those 5 said they'll come back for comprehensive dentistry. So the level of patient loyalty you've got, how many patients are asking, that's what needs to guide your decisions. And I think Cyril made a great point about that. Back to the supply and equipment, if there's a 15% increase or 10% increase in demand for dentistry, there will be a 10% increase in need for supplies. And if there's strong downward pressure on practice economics, there will be less money to pay for new equipment. But there will also be very compelling reasons to invest in equipment that improve your productivity. And what I can say is that I know our company, or the parent company Bernie and I sold the business to, do business right around the world. And in the US, where reimbursement levels are so much lower, or in the UK, they still have very robust equipment and supply sales. So I don't think I would be shorting Henry Schein stock because of the CDCP. Not my area of expertise with the company.
How can our audience get in touch with you guys if they, because a lot of these questions, it really depends on your practice. It really depends on so many different factors. And I think it is worth actually, speaking to an expert, trying to figure out, what is the right decision, to take, what is the right direction for your practice? What is the best way everyone can get in touch with you both?
I can give you my email. It's very, very straightforward. It's my name, Bernie.Dolansky at henryschein.ca. You can also find it on the Tier 3 website, and all my contact information is on that website. So is Bill's.
Yeah, and I'm Bill.Henderson at tier3.ca. Just go to the website, we'd love to hear from people. Oh, there you got it.
There you got it.
Yeah, I typed them out just to make it easier for everybody. And then obviously in the recording that we'll send out, I'll make sure to put it in there as well. For any questions we didn't get to, our team will review them just to make sure there's nothing we missed, and we will send it over to Bill and Bernie. But I highly advise that you guys reach out to them directly. To end it off on, I think that analogy you gave with the ship is absolutely fantastic. I think if you focus your attention on, what can you do? How can you navigate the storm? You're going to come out the other side a lot better than just, raging against something that it's happened. We can't undo it. I think Canada's enjoyed sort of a water protection for a long time. We're just starting to get a bit of a taste of what the US has been dealing with for many years. But I think it's, I think you can ride this sort of change, if you stay positive and you focus on what can you do. I think there's a lot that you can do to navigate this properly and come out the other side, much better.
Nick, Bernie and I know we'll both echo that. I'll give Bernie the last word. He likes having that. I've been around the industry since I met my wife, and been heavily involved in the economics since 2008. Honestly, I am optimistic still. This is the biggest storm cloud we've ever had on the horizon, no doubt about it in my mind. But I've watched dentists, and those of you on this call, depending upon what happened in your province, but I've watched dentists go through the massive changes in workplace health and safety legislation and requirements in a practice. And a lot of people were really pissed off, very frustrated. There were skies falling then. Same thing happened with IPAC when infection protocols hit dentists very hard. God knows we all went through COVID and how challenging that was. And what I would say is, my general observation is dentists are incredibly resilient. They when faced with major challenges, and this may become a major challenge again, they find ways of dealing with it. They do that around the world. We've talked about other markets where revenue levels are much lower, but I've seen it again and again and again here in Canada. So I remain very optimistic about the profession, but I'll tell everyone that, I used the comment earlier, lost the first battle, but there are many battles to come. And the biggest change I've seen in dentistry in my time in the industry, Bernie, this will lead into you, is for the first time I've been in the business, I've been truly impressed with the provincial and national association and their ability to advocate effectively against what otherwise would have happened. So please keep supporting them. The fight to maintain the right to balance bill, to keep fees going up in line with costs, to deal with the critical staffing supply issues, sort out the problems in this program and the coming problems with predetermination, deserve everyone's effort. And I know this industry is gonna rise to that challenge. Bernie.
Thank you. Well, I think you've pretty well covered it. The only thing I want to add is I started this very early on in saying, this is my second round with this type of managed care. The first round, we could make it disappear. Second round, it's not the benefits industry, it's the government. It's here to stay. You've heard us say that again and again. And yes, dentistry is very, very resilient. Bill left out a number of other crises, maybe before his time. Maybe some of you remember when HIV was an issue and nobody wanted to go to the dentist because of HIV. We've weathered many, many of these things. I'm a little less long-term optimistic than Bill is, because I do think with time, some of the doom and gloom will happen. Whether that's in 3 years, 5 years, 10 years, or 15 years, my crystal ball isn't telling me. But yes, over time, there will be an erosion of fees compared to fee guides. I'm still optimistic about balance billing. I don't see anything in it for the politicians. The only fly in that ointment is if they start getting a lot of negative feedback from their constituents, people on the program, that it's still costing too much to go to the dentist. That will put pressure on balance billing. And that is, I believe, what happened with our single-payer medical system and why politicians got rid of it. So yes, that is a danger. There's one more on the horizon that we haven't talked about, and that is, and it's starting to happen apparently, the talk about private dental plans being withdrawn from the marketplace because so many people are going to be covered by CDCP. And that's another possible risk that could be more, let's say, short to midterm over the next 3 to 5 years that we'll have to keep an eye on. All the more reason to underline what Bill said. Support your dental associations. They're your union. They're the only people that are organized enough and have the wherewithal, both in money and in terms of skills, to keep us as whole as possible in this environment. Yes, I'm biased. I'm a past president, past dental politician. But Bill is absolutely right. They've been very effective in this fight. I'll admit it. Before that, they did a lot of navel gazing, weren't particularly effective at some things, but this has brought out the best in them again, and we should support them.
Well, thank you so much there was a lot of insights there. Normally these webinars are about 45 minutes. We're an hour and 20. So it's fantastic. For those of you who had to leave early, everyone will get the recording, and I highly advise that you share them with colleagues that maybe weren't able to attend or weren't part of our email list. We'll also put this out on YouTube in the next couple of days. But thank you so much, everyone. For any questions we didn't get to, I will make sure to go through them, pass them off to Bill and Bernie so they can reach out directly. Highly, encourage you guys to reach out to Bill and Bernie directly as well if you have any questions about your specific dental practice and best way to navigate the situation. But again, thanks again for sharing your insights and taking the time. And hopefully we'll have you guys back here pretty soon for the next one.
Actually, a repeat 6 months down the road or 12 months down the road when we've seen how it's played out in more real time would be a lot of fun. and very valuable. There's a lot to see still.
And everybody can then tell us everything we got wrong.
Exactly. We'll probably even admit it.
No,
Well,
these
thanks,
are dentists. They'll tell us everything we got wrong. I can say that. I'm a dentist.
Yeah, exactly.
All right.
All
Thanks,
right.
everyone.
Bye, everybody.
Bye.
Have a great day.